Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage Natalia Martinez-Kalinina of BASE and our esteemed panel.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, or afternoon, as of 8 minutes ago. Thank you for joining us for this really incredible and important conversation on the pivotal role of women in the informal sector across society. I'm joined by 4 fantastic panelists who are about to tell us a little bit more about their work and their perspective on this critical topic for economic and urban development. Starting directly to my left is Carmen Correa, CEO of ProMujer. Then we have Dr. Felicia Knaul, Director of the Institute of Advancement Study of the Americas at the University of Miami, our host today. We have Dr. Sheila Davis, CEO of Partners in Health, and Anita Bhatia, Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director of UN Women. Thank you all for joining. So to kick us off, since we don't have a ton of time, can each of you first tell us a little bit of context so we're anchored in your work, your respective work, so give us a little bit of context on that. And then within that, tell us a little bit about what you have found as local case studies of success within this topic of empowering women in local communities. We know that informal labor has a huge gender dimension, and so tell us a little bit about what you have found that has worked and that has been inspiring, and what from that can possibly be a learning for scale.
Thank you, Natalia. And basically, ProMujer, we have been working for more than 32 years now in advancing gender equality in Latin America. The vast majority of the women we work with at ProMujer operate in the informal market and basically without the social guarantees. So we have been very careful throughout our history of working with them, trying to get them into the formal market. But basically we have discovered that in female entrepreneurship, we found an exceptional way of getting women into the formal market, helping them, supporting them in the development of these small businesses. So this is a vehicle that allows us to integrate women into the formal market, and we have seen thousands of stories of women that they have changed, they have shifted their life 180 degrees, not only getting the needed economic autonomy, but also they have become employers themselves, and they have changed their life not only for themselves, but also for their family members, and they have begun even to sell not only in the local markets, but even exporting their products. So you have to get to know those stories to understand how entrepreneurship can shift and can change the life of women. Not only they can integrate into the formal market, but they have become multipliers and examples for others and their communities. How we have achieved this? With a holistic approach. It's not only giving access to the needed funds to develop those businesses, but also supporting them in giving them access to the needed skills. Although we have been working with them in giving access to a financial system and also to those funds that are needed, but we also support them in accessing the resources and support they need to develop those businesses. So in addition, we have discovered that human and personalized support is key. We have to understand what they need. We have to really develop services that can provide that change, and not only with I'm always stating a paternalistic approach or a paternalistic logic, but from a cooperative approach. It's not that, oh, the poor women. No, they can change. They have actually the strength. They have the capacity to change. So we have to approach them, giving them access to the needed resources. But it's not about the poor women we are supporting.
So I thought I would share a little bit, and it's more from a research perspective, of what we know about the health sector and the participation of women in the health sector. A lot of this work was for the Lancet Commission on Women in Health, led by Drs. Langer and Menlace, and I did some of the research for this, and we've updated it now. But basically, 70% of all healthcare is provided by women. paid and unpaid. So they're the majority of all providers in the paid sector and in the unpaid sector. But they're also tremendously underpaid and undervalued throughout. And so when we think about successful programs in health, we often talk about Best Buy packages. We talk about Best Buy packages to get to universal health coverage. But all of these are anchored in what have been very successful programs for achieving more health in many parts of the world. We can talk about the ASHAs. We can talk about the lady health workers. We can talk about programs really globally. We can talk about Oportunidades that was scaled up in Mexico. But at the heart of that is a true undervaluation of the work of women and the care economy. So it's cheaper because we're cheapening women. We cheapen women, we cheapen health. And so what we've been calling for is completely to rethink this, where to build a model of universal health coverage in our world that is based on and reliant on the exploitation primarily of women is perhaps a way to get more health, but is not a way to get more gender equality, and certainly not a way, I would say, to strengthen our economies in the longer run. And what we end up with are some successful indicators. We have the majority of women, the majority of those who study medicine are women, so we have the majority of learners being women, but the majority of leaders being men. And we end up with a very gendered labor force, a lot of under and unemployment, and so we end up, in the long run, with people without health care, without access to physicians, without access to nurses, without access to health, and primarily women without access to work. And the last thing just to say is I would suggest that we think not of informal, which is a word that I tend not to use very much as an economist, but non-salaried, because they don't have access to the benefit of so-called formal, but it's more salaried work. And then there are some examples of programs that have done it right, and I know I'm going to turn to my left and hear more about that, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thanks. So Partners in Health is a social justice global health organization. We work in 11 countries, including the US, and we have 18,000 employees, 12,000 of which are community health workers. Community health workers are the foundation or the backbone of our care, but I think the importance is our community health workers are paid and they're hooked up into the health system. They're not a replacement for the health system. They're an integral part of it. We certainly know that for many women, community health worker positions are the first time they've ever worked formally, getting salaried. I love that, Felicia. As well as the ability to have that be, if they choose, a pathway to other opportunities. In Peru, for example, at Socios en Salud, our project in Peru, there is a program for community health workers or their children to apply for funding for scholarships. We do that in collaboration with the Ministry of Health. That, I think, is just one example of where ensuring that this amazing backbone of our work, that the community health workers are able to, if they choose to, have opportunities beyond working as a community health worker. We also see that the healthy women are by far the best, in the best place to take care of their families and their communities. So 2/3 of our work at Partners in Health is centered around women and children. That we firmly believe that by caring for women in the community, that rises everybody up, so it's not a replacement for caring for others, but certainly as a mainstay. I think our goal is that we're able to have women be a huge piece of our work throughout and in our leadership structures as well, which is a challenge, and I think is a way I think all of us need to be continuing to work together and synergizing to ensure that women just are not in the community health worker role, but are able to move beyond that if they choose to and work in a variety of other settings.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I just want to say a little bit about UN Women first. So UN Women is the flagship entity in the global multilateral system that works on gender equality and women's rights. We're about 12 years old, the newest agency in the UN system, and we were set up by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon because the story he told me was that when he got to the UN, he realized there was an agency working on lots of important global problems, children, UNICEF, health, WHO, trade, WTO, but nothing that was really looking exclusively at the issue of women. And that's why we were set up. So the perspective I want to offer is a little bit first to just put this in the context of the post-pandemic world we're in. And if we look at what happened during the pandemic, women, particularly women in the informal economy, were hit in three ways. They lost income, they lost health, and they lost security. Income, because many of the sectors that women traditionally work in were very heavily and disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, whether it was tourism, retail, or others. Health, because governments pivoted appropriately to dealing with the pandemic, but that meant a lot of other issues in women's health. Maternal mortality, reproductive rights suffered and they really suffered because you cannot tell a woman who needs an abortion, please come back in 6 months. Security suffered because we saw an exponential rise in violence against women. So those were the three issues that we saw visibly during the pandemic. And they continue to this day. So we are building back better, but we have not addressed yet the structural inequalities which became very clear during the pandemic because of the pandemic. You asked, what are some examples of things that have worked? So the single biggest revolution that is changing women's lives over the last decade has been through digital inclusion and through the power of technology. So if we look at the case of M-Pesa in Kenya, this is a story of a financial inclusion program that has lifted women out of poverty because for the first time, they have been able to have bank accounts, they have been able to access credit, and it's a marvelous story because the story of financial inclusion in Kenya is a story of improvement in poverty rates for the country as a whole. Kenya increased its economic growth by 2 percentage points as a result of financial inclusion. That is extraordinary. The other thing that I think really works for women is collective organizing. So if you look at the case of Seva in India, which is a group of self-help groups, this is a program and an initiative which has brought millions of women in the informal sector together. And that collective bargaining power means that they are able to get rid of intermediation, negotiate better prices for their products, and really use the power of the collective for achieving individual good. And then the third thing that I think governments really need to invest in through public-private partnerships is building infrastructure that allows the democratization of e-commerce. Because lots of women in the informal economy, exactly as Carmen said, are entrepreneurs. But where do they sell their products now? They're selling their products, in their little stall. So I was just in India for the G20, because India is the president of the G20 this year. And there is a platform that the government is building, which I'm talking to a lot of people about. It's called the Open Network for Digital Commerce. And basically what this does is it allows anybody to transact on this platform, but without paying the 40% that you would pay Amazon or any other homegrown platform where they make money by taking fees from the entrepreneurs. So if we can democratize digital access, we will change women's lives.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for sharing. And to double click a little bit on that last comment in terms of the government perspective. So from a policy angle, I'm curious what each of your thoughts are on what key changes can be considered, should be considered to further the socioeconomic mobility of women in this category.
Change is collective. We have to be working together, private sector, public sector, civil society. So we have to align and we have to cooperate and we have to give women all the opportunities working together, because otherwise that change won't last. It will be something that can last for a few months, a few years, but it won't last and it won't generate a real change. So we need to be working together. We need to actually be looking into different aspects, and everyone here, different organizations, different corporations, we have the opportunity to be working together, but we have the duty to be working together. So that is what we should be looking for. It doesn't matter if it is a public policy, it doesn't matter if it is a big corporation trying to incorporate the gender perspective, but we need to incorporate the gender perspective in every aspect. So that is what we look forward to. Of course, ProMujer is trying to support other organizations that want to incorporate this gender perspective, given basically our knowledge, sharing what we have learned during this year, but we need to be working together, and it is crucial that during this collaboration process, we incorporate the women perspective. We have to listen to women. Actually, they have the answers. We have the answers. So we have to be in those decision-making tables, and we have to be there, because otherwise it won't, maybe what you design is not designed with that women perspective and with that actually need incorporated in it.
So we've spoken about sort of 4 principles: valuing women, compensating women, counting women, and being accountable to women. But, and here I'll speak more as a labor economist, unless we get parity in not only wages, but in access to benefits, we will never actually be valuing men and women on the same field. But what we're really doing is truly undervaluing the care economy. So we are assuming that women do that undervalued or unpaid work, and that men don't have the opportunity to do so. And what we think we need to drive for in terms of policy is one in which both men, women, or better said, all genders have the same access to the opportunity to be able to enjoy being part of a family, if that's what they would like to do, but certainly to help in a caring economy in which we have to think about those who are older, our neighbors, as well as our own families. And therefore, level a playing field for all genders, think about men and women, so that we can all participate in a way that is gender transformative. But I think that at the core of that is really this idea of valuing not only the work-life balance, but valuing these different aspects of what is useful and productive in our lives, something that we haven't done until now.
I think from a specific policy standpoint, I think the advocating for paid community health workers throughout, one, certainly for the reasons we're talking about today in terms of valuing, and this is a way that it is valuing a role that women as caregivers often are put in an unpaid way. So I think if we could globally be advocating for paid community health workers at a living wage, not as a stipend, would be a huge asset. Also at Partners in Health, we have a program on social and economic rights. And the goal of that program is to ensure that patients' communities have access to needed social support of food, of education, of transportation, of economic opportunities of education. And I think from a policy standpoint, ensuring that these key things that are addressing the social determinants of health being included at a policy level around healthcare would be essential for us to make these really critical changes.
I would say from a policy perspective, 4 things. First, I think it's really important for governments to do gender responsive budgeting. All ministries and all governments should be asked to think about their investments from a gender lens. Why do I say that? Because this cannot be the role of just a gender ministry or the White House Gender Policy Council. It has to be a cross-cutting issue. So for example, when you think about women in the informal economy, or women actually even in the formal economy, safety, harassment is a huge issue for women. So if the Ministry of Transport is thinking with the gender lens, they're going to have buses that are women-only buses in countries where this is an issue. They will have buses that run to obscure places where women may be living. And so that gender lens in investments is absolutely critical. And many governments are doing a good job, but it's just not at scale. So Morocco's done a really good job on gender responsive budgeting. The Ministry of Finance publishes every year a report which says, what is every ministry doing about gender? And obviously, with the existential threat of climate change upon us, it is really crucial that all climate change policies think about the role of women in both as victims of climate change, but also as agents of change for climate change. So that's one. The second, I think, I could not agree more with Felicia when she says this issue of unpaid care or non-salaried work, like that phrase, Felicia, is really important. And unfortunately, it's something that right now, when you look across the globe, governments in Latin America are taking quite seriously. Argentina, Uruguay, Mexico, Chile are all thinking about how to legislate around this. But the rest of the world is really behind. And so, if we really want to see a massive improvement in women's welfare, we need to acknowledge through public policy that women's labor is not binary between leisure and work, but trinary between leisure, work, and unpaid work. And that needs to feed into all assumptions of wage growth, of how you think about inflation, how you think about your macroeconomic stuff, because gender is really a macro-critical issue as well. The third thing I would say is, again, agreeing with my fellow panelists, is we do need more progressive women and progressive men who care about women at decision-making tables. I used to think that it was really just about having more women at the table, and yes, that matters. But I have been struck by the negative impact of having women in certain positions of power. You just have to look at what's happened to certain rights in this country as a result of changes in composition of important bodies, and you have to look at what is happening in some countries who have female heads of state who are anti-women, essentially. So it's really about people with the right set of values. When we need more of those in decision-making roles. But, because we still don't have enough women on boards, we don't have enough women as CEOs of companies, things are not changing fast enough. And the last thing I would say, and this is a bit controversial, but I really believe it, governments have to reduce military spending. Governments have to reduce defense expenditure and pivot away from building arms infrastructure to investing on climate change and investing in social protection programs, in health, in education, and those things that are fundamental for sustainable development.
Thank you. So as we kind of wrap up our panel, thank you again, kind of a final question to close us out on the other side of the coin. So how significant are cross-sector partnerships, and what can be done around incentivizing the right action from the private sector or private-public partnerships? What can be done for that to be either a leading or at least a following force?
Partnerships are key. For us, for example, in the case of ProMujer, we are looking always forward to partner with other organizations that will allow us to expand our footprint, our impact, develop new products, new services, and even develop and innovate, in the sense that we need always to keep up with the changing needs of women. So for that, we need partners, and we look forward, very much forward to partner with other organizations.
Yeah, and picking up on what Anita said, there are just too many governments in the world that are not getting it at all, or that are not getting it fast enough. And so we need to have the private sector standing up with those kinds of innovative policies, and also civil society standing up. It's the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. The data that we have on violence against women, against children, 1 in 3 women, 1 in 5 children, and those are the lower estimates. There is no way that that is not distracting significantly from any investment that we're making in human capital, in education, and in our labor markets. And if governments don't get that, then companies, corporate sector, private sector will, and faster. And I believe that that can give a wedge that we need to generate change at the subnational and at the national level.
Thank you.
I think it's critical that partnerships are also based on what communities' priorities are. And important, I think, that we're looking at where can we have mentorship from the private sector to many of our colleagues that work in our health facilities around the world, certainly from the community health worker on up, there often are not women who can be role models and pathways for us to establish for women to get this experience and be able to not just be at the table, but participate appropriately at the table in a way that they are sharing what they're knowing and sharing their expertise. And I think we do a disservice by just insisting a woman be at the table, but not having a woman equipped to be able to talk the same language, to utilize the same monitoring, evaluation, et cetera. So I think would give us a long a lead for us to be able to do that. I think it's going to take commitment from the private sector as well as the public sector.
Thank you.
I know we're out of time, so I'll be very brief. Partnerships are very powerful, but it's also really important for everybody, every stakeholder, to actually play the role that they're supposed to play, which means governments have to actually create, regulate in the right way, actually have to have the right sets of public policies, which can then be the enabling environment for the private sector and other stakeholders to act. But the government role is fundamental, and it's missing, as we were saying, in many countries. And the second thing is for the private sector, which is the world's largest creator of jobs, right? Except in the Arab states, where the governments are still the larger creator of jobs. But with the private sector playing such a fundamental role in job creation, it is essential that they too have policies that support all of the issues we've been talking about. For example, the care burden. The private sector should be out there saying, we're thinking about our employees, not just in terms of the child care burden that you have when your children are from 1 to 3, but what do you do about picking up middle school kids? What do you do about elder care? This has got to be a burden that is shared by the private sector. Otherwise, post-pandemic, we're just going to continue to see the trends that we've seen in many countries where female labor force participation is actually dropping. And so we are going to face a world where we're talking about gender equality and women's empowerment more than we ever have before, but the reality is not matching the rhetoric. So if we want to change that, we do need partnerships, but we need the right enabling environment.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for a really stimulating conversation. Please join me in thanking our panelists.